Apologies from Stuart Dixon and Patsy McGlone. Both are apologising, yeah. Okay. Mr McCartney and Mr Lynch send their apologies as well. There's matters arising. There's correspondence from the Minister for Health in respect of Clause 12, which was touched upon at our meeting last week. And we had agreed to request clarification from the Department on whether it intended to bring forward any amendments to Clause 12, the Human Trafficking Bill around the Child Trafficking Guardian. The Health Departmental Assembly Liaison Officer had indicated to staff in the committee office that the Department didn't intend to bring forward any amendments, but subsequently the Minister has now written indicating there's ongoing liaison with Lord Morrow on a matter on these issues to find a resolution. So if members are content, we will note that position. We formally agreed that clause last week. Item 3 then is to go through the formal clause by clause, the remaining clauses that need to be agreed formally by the committee, which we commenced on Thursday the 3rd of April. Formal questions were put on a number of clauses, and then we agreed to complete the process at today's meeting in order for the draft committee report to be provided to the committee meeting this Thursday before committee stage ends at the end of the week. So there's a paper outlining the committee's position on each of the remaining clauses that can be found on pages 7 through to 12 of your meeting pack. And I'll work through each of the remaining clauses, putting the formal questions. Where there are amendments to the clauses, then I will put the question on the amendments first, followed then by the question on the clause. So Clause 3 was around aggravating factors. We agreed that we were content with Clause 3 as amended by Lord Morrow, and the Department of Justice noted the Department was still looking at the definition of a vulnerable adult with a view to bringing forward a further amendment. The Department has now provided the wording of 2 further proposed technical amendments to define vulnerable adult and the family of the victim by reference to Article 34 of the Sexual Offences Northern Ireland Order 2008. Lord Morrow has indicated that he is content with the proposed amendments. So let me put the question. Is the committee content with Lord Morrow's and the Department of Justice's proposed amendments? Content? Is the committee content with Clause 3 subject to Lord Morrow's and the Department of Justice's proposed amendments? Content? Clause 4 was around the minimum sentence for human trafficking and slavery offences. We considered advice which had been provided by the Bill Office on the amendments proposed in relation to 4.2 by both Lord Morrow and the Attorney General for Northern Ireland, which indicated that the amendments have the same objective, i.e. to avoid a suspended sentence being imposed under Clause 4. The advice then from the Bill Office on the proposed amendments to Clause 4 is at page 52 of your meeting pack. A range of views have been expressed by members in respect of this clause. Reservations were expressed by some in relation to the general concept of including a minimum sentence in legislation, the issue of exceptionality and the latitude for a presiding judge. Other members expressed support for the clause as amended by Lord Morrow, indicating that although Clause 4 narrows judicial discretion, it does not exclude it. Correspondence dated the 18th of March of this year, Lord Morrow indicated that he intended to insert a new Clause 17a to make amendments consequential to Clause 4. Lord Morrow has now decided to address the matter through a further amendment to Clause 4 and has provided the wording of that further proposed amendment. So I need to put the formal question now in respect of Clause 4, if members are in a position to do that. Is the committee content with Lord Morrow's proposed amendments? Content? Okay.
We have a sort of broad thing around minimum sentences.
Okay. Then, is the committee content with Clause 4 subject to Lord Morrow's proposed amendments? Content? Yeah. Clause 6, paying for sexual services of a person. Clarification was sought from Lord Morrow on his thinking in relation to his proposed amendments to change person to prostitute, and whether that remained his position in light of the Attorney General's letter indicating that in his view using the word prostitute goes further than necessary to limit the scope of Clause 6 and will create a hurdle to prosecution that could be avoided. Some members agreed to support Clause 6 and give further consideration to the issue of person prostitute, while others indicated they had not yet reached a definitive view on the clause. Lord Morrow has now responded regarding his position to the use of person or prostitute. After consultation with the Attorney-General, Lord Morrow has provided revised amendments to Clause 6, which will narrow the offence whilst keeping the word person, remove any reference to the age of the person who is selling the sexual services, remove the reference to payment including sexual services, and provide some further options on sentencing, and require an advertising campaign to ensure public awareness of the change effected by Clause 6. And a copy of Lord Morrow's letter is at pages 31 to 35 of your meeting folder. The Department has indicated that it remains opposed to Clause 6. As such, the Department doesn't intend to make any amendments to the clause, although it has indicated that if it proceeds, it may require amendment. Should Clause 6 not stand part of the bill, the Department intends to bring forward an amendment which will extend the time limit for prosecution of offences under Article 64A of the Sexual Offences Order, Northern Ireland 2008, from 6 months to 3 years, and has providing the wording of the proposed amendment. The amendment will not be moved, however, if Clause 6 does stand part of the bill. Okay, members, well, I'm happy to give members an opportunity to state their position on this. Obviously, this is the clause that has generated the most public debate, and obviously the committee now needs to try and reach a final definitive position on it. So we'll start with Mr. Wells.
Well, I suppose this is the defining moment as far as Clause 6 is concerned with this committee. Our group are very supportive of the clause as amended by the various consultations. We've been to Sweden, we've taken evidence from a wide range of groups, and it's noticeable that organisations such as the Irish Congress of Trade Unions, the Women's Aid and the Northern Ireland Human Rights Commission have backed it, which I think is a very broad church indeed when you add it in with the churches, Church of Ireland, Roman Catholic, who have supported it. Second, we have seen increasing political support for the equivalent of Clause 6. We've seen the fact that the Nordic model has been adopted now by Iceland, Norway and Sweden. France is going through the process of adopting it. It's before its Senate at the moment. And there have been some very notable supporters from the Irish Republic. And we accept, of course, that it is important that the two jurisdictions move in tandem on this. We went to Dublin, and I was particularly impressed with the comments made by Patrick McLaughlin, TD for Donegal North West, who said that he had started from a position of scepticism about the Turn Off the Red Light campaign and the report of the Oireachtas Justice Committee, and having looked at the evidence, had moved now to a very enthusiastic supporter of the equivalent of Clause 6. And of course we had evidence from the Turn Off the Red Light campaign. Now, of course, since that we've had the vote from the European Parliament. We're delighted that both Martina Anderson and Diane Dodds have supported an equivalent call for the outlawing of the purchase of sexual services. And today we've had the vote by the members of the European Council, the elected members of the European Council, who by a huge majority have adopted a similar stance as being proposed by Lord Morrow. So all the evidence seems to be stacking up in favour. The only people who have opposed Clause 6 are those which we have shown through cross-examination to have a direct pecuniary interest in the prostitution trade, particularly organisations such as Ugly Mugs and Escort Ireland IE, organisations like that who clearly fear this particular proposal as to a diminution of their particular trade. Now, there have been a small group of others, but of course those have been coordinated by Amnesty International. And we did show through cross-examination that Amnesty International's initial policy was adopted through a proposal by a gentleman who turned out to be a leading beneficiary of the prostitution trade in the northwest of England. And it's noticeable that a small number of witnesses simply followed the Amnesty International line, which of course Amnesty haven't as yet adopted a policy of supporting the prostitution industry, but that's coming up at their International Congress, I think it's in Chicago this week. So I think all the evidence indicates that if you cut off the trade, the vast majority of those who are trafficked, particularly women, are trafficked for the purposes of prostitution. If you reduce and diminish that trade, you diminish the demand for prostitution. And it was a great pity that more members didn't turn up to the evidence given by the lady from Romania, who indicated that she had been kidnapped off the street and trafficked to Galway for £20,000 and had been locked in a room for 11 months and treated in the most horrendous way. And that is what's going on. And we do no service to the equality of women if we allow that to continue. So we need to make Northern Ireland, and indeed the island of Ireland, a cold house for prostitution. And we need to set an example which hopefully other jurisdictions will follow. So whilst I reserve the right to come back and comment about other members' views on this, I believe we should most certainly give this our enthusiastic support and do something for the many scores of women in Northern Ireland who even at this moment may be locked in various rooms, being forced to service 20, 30 clients a day. They deserve the right and the protection of society through this legislation.
Okay. Mr. Elliott.
Chair, thank you, and appreciate Mr. Wells's point. Obviously, I have listened carefully to all the evidence that has come forward. We have discussed it at party group. What our party are doing, we certainly would not vote against it at this stage, but we would reserve our position on it until further consideration stage this time.
Okay, thank you. Mr. McGuinness.
Yes, well, in general terms, content with Clause 6. I think the preponderance of the evidence given to this committee has been in favour of Clause 6. And certainly there seems to me to be an international trend in favour of what's been termed the Nordic model. And this is a variant on that particular model. I also think that we need to be congruent with the developments in the south. I think that they will also go for a form of Clause 6. Certainly the report by the Oireachtas Committee on Justice indicated that on an all-party basis, and I think that is strongly supportive of a provision similar to Clause 6. But you know, at the end of the day, there are details within Clause 6 that may need attention. I have read briefly the letter from Lord Morrow to the committee in relation to his amendments. I need to study that in more detail. But just looking at it on a superficial reading, I think that I would be sympathetic to his changes. But I don't want to give a definitive position until I've read the thing properly. So just in general terms, content with the clause and subject to my latter remarks in relation to the amendments that Lord Morrow is putting forward.
Thank you.
Our position, as was outlined last Thursday, we're not in a position either to offer support either way.
Okay, members. Everyone's had an opportunity then to state their final positions at this stage of their consideration. So let me formally put the question then: is the committee content with Lord Morrow's proposed amendments? Content? Any objections to being content?
Well, just in terms of
or abstentions?
That's sort of what I'll do, abstain in terms of broad commentary.
Okay, so there's I'm recording 2 abstentions and then contentment, unless anyone else is wanting to officially abstain. Okay. Then, is the committee content with Clause 6 subject to Lord Morrow's proposed amendments? Content and
2 abstentions.
Okay. Okay, members, thank you. Clause 8 was the non-prosecution of victims of trafficking in human beings. Clause 8 may not be necessary if assurance is given by the Public Prosecution Service in relation to its prosecutorial guidance, which deals with human trafficking cases, addresses Lord Morrow's concerns in relation to the non-prosecution of victims of trafficking in human beings. Lord Morrow has also indicated that he intends to await the recommendations of the Joint Committee in Westminster, which is currently considering the question of how non-prosecution of victims should be dealt with as part of its scrutiny of the draft Modern Slavery Bill. Further consideration to whether they supported the principles underlying Clause 8 as outlined by Lord Morrow is in his letter dated 18th of March. Members had indicated previously that we were not in a position to support Clause 8 as drafted, but we agreed that the report should reflect that the committee supports the principles underlying it and wishes to consider the findings of the Joint Committee on the matter. The Director of Public Prosecutions has written to the Minister acknowledging the level of public concern around this issue and has given a commitment to issue further detailed guidance to prosecutors that will be consistent with the intent behind Clause 8. So I think that's helpful. Then the question will now be put on this clause as drafted, and then the text of the report will reflect the context for the committee's decision around this particular clause, which previously members had indicated we would be formally, for the purpose of the record, saying that we're not content but supporting the principles behind it. So is the committee content with Clause 8 as drafted? No. Not content? Not content. Okay. Clause 11 is compensation for victims of trafficking. Concern had been expressed that the guidance proposed by the Department's amendment to Clause 11 may not ensure adequate compensation could be paid to victims of trafficking. We agreed to give further consideration of the options available to provide the Assembly with a degree of control. We considered that last week. We agreed that we would seek then a commitment from the Minister on the floor of the House around this particular clause. The Department has now provided the wording of a proposed minor technical amendment to Clause 11, which is to correct an error in the previous drafting. So I'll need to put the question then on the amendment to members. So is the committee content with the Departments of Justice's proposed amendment? Content? Is the committee then content with Clause 11 subject to the Department of Justice's proposed amendment? Content? 15 was prevention. The committee agreed that it was content with Clause 15 subject to the final wording of the Department of Justice proposed amendment. And the Department had provided an indicative draft of the wording of the amended clause. That has now been provided, the final wording of the proposed amendment to Clause 15, which has been agreed by Lord Morrow. So is the committee content with the Department of Justice's proposed amendment? Content? Is the committee content with Clause 15 subject to the Department of Justice's proposed amendment? Content? Content. 16 is around the Northern Ireland Rapporteur. The committee noted the remit of the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, which would be created by the draft Modern Slavery Bill, could be extended to Northern Ireland. Members agreed to consider whether we wish to indicate that we did not support Clause 16 at this time, but will consider the matter further when there is clarity on the position regarding the Anti-Slavery Commissioner, or alternatively, we had indicated that we could support Clause 16 at this stage, but would wish to consider the position further when there's clarity on the position regarding the Anti-Slavery Commissioner. We had indicated last week that our preference was to support Clause 16 at this stage as drafted, and members then can consider it at a future point subject to the position around the Anti-Slavery Commissioner. So I'll put that question now to members. Is the committee content with Clause 16 as drafted? Content? Content. 19 was the short title commencement. We considered the wording of draft amendments that had been prepared by the Bill Office to make provision for the Bill to commence on Royal Assent, or alternatively commence the Bill a short time after Royal Assent to build in some flexibility for those departments and other organisations who will be involved in the implementation of the Bill. For example, to provide training and introduction of support mechanisms. Draft amendments can be found on page 54 of the meeting pack. Last week, members agreed a preference to set a time frame for commencement of the bill 3 months after Royal Assent. The text of the amendment, therefore, would read, after Clause 19, page 10.9.2, leave out from in to order on line 13 and insert 3 months after Royal Assent. So let me put the question. Is the committee content with the proposed amendment to set a time frame for commencement of the bill 3 months after Royal Assent? Content?
Yes.
Is the committee content with Clause 19 subject to the committee's proposed amendment? Content?
Content.
Long title. As this is the end of the clause-by-clause consideration of the bill, the committee must now consider the long title of the bill.
Just before we move to that, at the last committee meeting there was a reference to the forced marriages proposal. Are we still in a position that we won't have seen that before we adopt a report? Is that going to be dropped in by a formal amendment by the Minister, or does it come from this committee, or how does that work?
We had written, as the committee had asked, to the Department of Finance and Personnel, asking for some more background to it and the proposed wording of the draft amendment if they had it, and we haven't received a reply yet. What we will do in the body of the report is reflect that the committee's been advised of their intention, and that you have requested further information. That's probably as far as we can go in the report itself, as you haven't got it yet. But you will be able to look at it in slower time.
Yes, so we will get that before the consideration stage, right?
We're waiting on a response. I think they were hoping they might have been able to get it to us this week, but it's going to be too late to put it in the report now.
And I think
the report will reflect that there is this proposed amendment. We just don't have very much information on it, but we will indicate the committee's asked for the further information, and we'll consider it when that's available.
I think most of us will be probably favour the principle. I'm just a bit concerned if there's something in the wording we were concerned with. Will we have time to reflect on that and then take a policy decision on the amendment?
Well, my understanding is that Lord Morrow is not intending to move consideration stage until after the summer, to allow the Department of Justice to bring forward more amendments as a result of their consultation. So there should be time to look. As soon as we get the information from the Department of Finance personnel, we'll bring it to the committee for consideration.
Okay. Yep. All right. So just to conclude again, in terms of the short title and commencement, is the committee content with the long title of the bill? Content?
Yeah.
Okay.
Chair,
Mr.
sorry.
Elliott.
Just overall, I certainly didn't vote or even vote against or abstain on any of the clauses, because there are a number of clauses that I still, I'm not totally content with, but I don't want to hold it up. Certainly don't want to vote against it at this stage, but I would like it recorded that, we reserve, that I reserve my position on them. I think I made that clear the last day as well, because there are a number of specific issues, and I don't want to vote against them because I think that probably send out the wrong signal, but I would reserve the right to bring forward amendments and at considerations.
At all of the different variances where there has been within the committee, and that'll be reflected in the report. So that'll be reflected ultimately when it gets into the chamber. I'll do that where members have indicated issues, but of course once you get into the next stage of the assembly, it's open to others to bring forward amendments and so forth. So okay, there's a list of documents for inclusion in the appendices of the committee report on the human trafficking bill, and that's been provided for members' consideration. Lord Morrow's letter dated 7th of April will be included in Appendix 3, and the letter from the Department dated 7th of April will be included in Appendix 4. It's whether members have any other views on other documents that need to be included in the list, or we're content with the exhaustive list that we have. Content. We'll be asked to formally agree the contents of the appendices when agreeing the committee report on Thursday, and sections of the draft report will be circulated as soon as they're ready. One other item that has come in correspondence for inclusion in the appendices was from Philip Bradfield, who's a journalist for the newsletter. He has communicated with the committee following the oral evidence sessions from Laura Lee, International Union of Sex Workers, and Dr. Graham Ellison. Mr. Bradfield is concerned that during the evidence sessions, witnesses appeared to forget or misremember details of what they had told him during their interviews with him, and this had the unintentional effect of implying that his journalism was inaccurate or misrepresentative. He's provided a link to the transcripts of his interviews with both Laura Lee and Dr. Graham Ellison, and has indicated that he wanted this correspondence brought to the committee's attention and included in the committee report. So, members content? Okay. Then we're meeting this Thursday at 2 o'clock, whenever we will formally agree the report. So can I thank members, because it's been a very long process, and I'll do it properly on Thursday, but it's been a long number of months for committee members, but eventually we've got as close as possible to an agreed position, and I want to express my appreciation for the work of members and for the committee staff that have supported the committee to enable us to get through to this stage. Okay, thank you.
This is the Northern Ireland Assembly Committee Room 29.